So actually, I am very grateful to those who responded that they were coming, because in the end, as I said in the email, it made me look at the end of the parsha. I always look at it, kind of on Shabbos and think, there's something going on there, but I don't know what. This whole business of how Yosef decides to administer the land, and who's going to get, and whose land he's going to take, and the special treatment given to the Kohanim of Egypt. And so this became an opportunity for me to look at that more carefully. And what I saw, I think, is interesting. And it actually also became fodder for the weekly email that I sent out this morning. So it gave me material for that too. So let's take a look at the end of the parsha, and we'll see what this is all about. V'lechem ein b'chol haaretz. You have to realize, this is a throwback. This piece that's at the end of the parsha. It's one of those situations where the Torah first goes through a story and then goes back to tell you what was happening during that story. So this doesn't fit at the end of the parsha. It actually belongs in last week's parsha, in Miketz. It's the story of what Yosef does for Egypt during the famine. Right? Think about it. At the beginning of Miketz, Yosef wows everybody by explaining Paro's dream and giving him a great idea. And then he becomes viceroy of Egypt, and then suddenly he's taking care of his brothers in various ways, and we never find out what he does as an administrator. Like, okay, what else is going on with his time when he's not torturing his brothers? So now we find out what's been going on all along in this piece at the end of Vayigash. The famine is very bad. There's no bread, or as I translated here, no food, because the truth is the word lechem often in Tanakh just means food. It doesn't mean bread per se. And they really didn't have the option. The Egyptians did not have the option of like, okay, so we'll go on a no bread diet, right? Low carb type of thing. No, there's no food. Ki chaved harav me'od. Vatela eretz Mitzrayim ve'eretz Canaan b'nei harav, and they are all distraught, upset, because of famine both in Egypt and in Canaan. The word vatela admits multiple explanations. I chose one from the Mefarshim. So first stage, Yosef sells them food. And as he sells them food, he gets all of their money. Yosef based on Paro, not for himself, it all goes to Paro. All the money is gone now. Now what happens? Both in Egypt and in Canaan. So the Egyptians come to Yosef and they say, we need food. Why should we die? We're out of money. So Yosef moves into the second stage, which is, okay, give me your cattle, and I'll sell you food instead for your cattle. So they bring all their cattle to Yosef, and Yosef gives them food in exchange for the horses, for the sheep, for the cattle, the donkeys, and that's the way he provides for them. That was stage 2. Stage 3.
Is that something?
Yeah.
Canaan and Mitzrayim, he was able to just go to Canaan and take their...
No, that part is only Mitzrayim. If you notice Pasuk Tezvav, it says Vayavoch Mitzrayim Yosef.
Or is he just taking care of his own people? But doesn't it say he takes all the silver that's in Eretz Mitzrayim and in Eretz Canaan?
Yes, because there they brought their money. But then the Egyptians run out of money, and they say, help us out. And he says, okay, I'll take your cattle. No word on what people in Canaan are doing at this point. Clearly, by the time you get to him buying up all the land, it's not Eretz Canaan. At some point, Eretz Canaan falls out of the calculation.
He's totally taking advantage of the people.
Oh, it gets better.
Very undemocratic.
What democratic? This is Pharaoh's Egypt. Just wait, it gets better.
Also, his personality is completely changing from what we see from the innocent little boy. And he's given power, and then
what innocent little boy? All you guys are going to bow down to me.
Yeah. He was never innocent.
I mean, I don't mean that quite as quickly as it sounds, but really, Yosef's been in training to run this country. Watch what happens. Pasuk Yuches. That year ends.
Analysts over here, by the way, are totally fine with.
It's now the second year. It's now the second year, and they say to him, "What are we going to do? We can't deny it. We've got nothing. We have no money. We have no cattle. All we have left is our bodies and our land. Why should we die?" take ourselves. Well, why should we die? Ourselves and our land. Buy us and buy our land for food. And what that means is we will become slaves to Paro, and we'll be able to plant, and we'll survive, and the land will not be ruined. So now, Yosef buys the land of the Egyptians. They've now all sold him their fields. And Yosef moves them, we're in Pasuk Chav Aleph, Yosef moves them le'arim. So there are two different trends in the Mefarshim and the commentators to this. Either that he moved them into cities. They had been farmers and he moves them into cities, and the land is owned by Paro and they travel to work it. Or alternatively, he moves them by cities, meaning he keeps the population of each community together. He keeps them intact. That's the other way to read it. So Yosef now has bought all their land for Paro as well, except in Pasuk Chav Beis, Rakat Masa Kohanim Lo Kana. He did not buy the land of the Kohanim. Kohanim are generally assumed by the commentators to be actual priests, idolatrous, Avodah Zarah. There is one view, the Chizkuni mentions it, a couple of others mention it, that maybe means the nobility in Egypt, but generally speaking it's assumed that no, these are priests of idolatry. Their land he does not purchase. Now, the way to explain this pasuk is a little tricky. I'm going to read it one way, but we'll see other ways to read it. Because there was a chok, meaning a portion, for the Kohanim from Paro. Right now I'm reading it as Paro has decided that these Kohanim are going to receive a certain amount of food, and they would eat their portion of food that Paro gave them, and therefore they didn't sell their land. Reading it right now, it sounds like Yosef has no hand in this decision. Paro has decreed the priests of Avodah Zarah are going to receive a certain allotment of food automatically. So when Yosef launches his campaign, this stage 3 operation in which he's getting everybody's land, he doesn't have access to the land of the Kohanim. And then it continues, Pasuk Chav Gimel, Yosef says to the nation, okay, here's the deal now. I now own you. And not me. Paro owns you. Paro owns your land. Here is some seed. Go plant the land. You're going to grow stuff, and you're going to give 20% to Paro, and you'll keep 80%. 80% will go for your food, it will go for your families, it'll go for your children. And they said, you're amazing. You have given us life. This is wonderful. Let's go be slaves to Paro.
What's the difference here between what they were doing beforehand with their land? Like, they were also still citizens of Egypt. Like, they must have been doing things. Maybe they care.
Yes, but evidently this is a different tax. Right? How much it is versus the regular is unclear. I did see one writer who suggested that actually this was this 190. And no, I don't actually. No, take that. Yeah, we're good. I did see one writer, a historian, who claimed that the normal tax in ancient Near East would have been 33%. And this was actually lower than the standard tax number, which I thought was very interesting.
So essentially all he did was give them seeds to plant?
He gets them seeds to plant, and he gets 20% of what they grow.
But they have the land.
Keep in mind, it's a famine. I don't know what they're growing.
Yeah, but how is this changing the famine? Like, how is this giving them food?
The seeds now, they have nothing.
Seeds, that's it? The whole thing?
Yeah.
Well, famine is usually lack of rain.
No, first we gave them food.
We don't have any indication.
They ate it off, and
What else would
anything.
Anything. Locusts who come in and eat everything. You could have plague. I mean, we don't know. We're not given any details. We're just told this is what's happening.
They were happy, so it...
And were Bnei Yisrael included in this famine?
Yes, you bet.
Or also suffering?
Well, they are not in Goshen yet. We're in Eretz Canaan still. That's what I meant when I said this is a throwback in time. All of this is happening while the Jews, Yaakov's family, are still in Canaan. They have not come down yet.
Have not come down to Mitzrayim to meet Yosef.
Correct.
Are they getting subsidies from the storehouses? Because they have stockpiles.
Who's they?
Like the citizens.
No, you got to go back over the something that we read first.
Well, they must be
It's not that. The stuff in the storehouses is not to be given away. It's for sale.
Okay. Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's where they come
Yeah,
from.
go, I mean,
always
read back
thought that
through it,
Yosef's plan was to be like good to the whole land, like all the storehouses was for like the country,
Okay.
not to take advantage of it.
So you may recall a note from Rashi, which is based on Medrash, which is based on the Sukkim, which is that actually when Yosef and his when Yaakov and his family come down to Mitzrayim, the famine ends. In other words, all of this is happening before they arrive. Look at the last pasuk here. Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen. The Jews settle in the land of Goshen. Vayachazuva, they took hold there. Vayifru vayirbu ma'od, and they multiplied. In other words, all of this was before they arrived in Egypt. So I'll ask you a question which some of you have already started to discuss anyway, which is, are Yosef's policies good for Mitzrayim? Is he helping them?
I don't see
Yes, they die otherwise.
You could argue in favor. Number one, the people are really grateful.
Problem with it.
They get to keep 80% of what they grow.
I know. It sounds like a great depression where people are waiting on line, spending hundreds of dollars for right away.
Yeah, I think it's not
Right away, they don't have to wait.
Where's the end game?
Well, unless they're also eating it.
It's very...
He's setting up, but this is after the fact. But maybe it's showing how he set up that he became more powerful than Paro, or as powerful.
Well,
So
Paro's getting all the money.
who's boss.
I don't see it as Yosef's relationship with Paro. It is certainly a development in terms of strengthening the authority of monarchy, because now they own everything.
So that Paro likes him more, so that he could then get Bnei Israel.
And Paro's for sure happy.
Ease, which didn't help.
Right, Paro's really happy. That's for sure. Take a look for a second at this medrash I brought you in number 2. Medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah. Kechol hayam. Right, we are compared to the sand by the sea. Right, Nimshlo Yisrael bechol v'ha'umos b'sid. Shneimar v'hayomim misrafos sid. He quotes you a pasuk from Yeshaya, in which the nations are compared to pyres, where they burn a lime. So we are like sand, and they are like a lime. What's the connection? Lime needs something to help it stick. It needs substance. And that's what sand does when you add it to lime. Otherwise it's liquid. I wouldn't know this. The Medrash tells me that. I believe it. I've never worked with lime. So too, the nations need the Jews as part of their ability to survive. It's not that if the Jews disappeared, there would be no Torah. If the Jews disappeared, there's no world. Not on a metaphysical level, like if no one's observing the Torah, why should the world exist? But on a practical level, he's saying that we provide something that the world needs. And so he says, Kaf Atamotze, Ilula Yosef Hayu Mitzrayim Avudim Barav. If not for Yosef, they would have died in famine. And so too, if not for Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar would have destroyed all of the sages of Babel who couldn't explain his dreams. So Yosef is an illustration of somebody who benefits the world. He's helping them. He may also be helping Paro. He may also be helping himself. But he's helping the society in which he lives. Leah, you ready?
No.
Both of those people are dreams. Is that coincidental? That's really kind of...
So there's a lot more, right? There's a lot more to the Yosef-Daniel story, and it's really a Yosef-Daniel-Esther story. And I've given Shirim on it, and maybe I'll send out a link later, because there's a lot to be said about the connections between those stories. I'm going to draw on it a little bit in the course of the discussion today, because it's going to fit into that, but it's a bigger issue. There are a lot of textual similarities, and then the Medrash sees it and builds on it in all sorts of ways.
So, but I'm saying how it says if not for the Jews, then this, but it's not really. It's Hashem gave them Ruach Kodesh to interpret those dreams. So it's not really all Jews don't all have that ability to save the world.
Right, but it's Yosef who chooses to use not just dream interpretation, but Yosef who chooses to help Mitzrayim, meaning Hashem gives Yosef the ability to understand Paro's dream. It's Yosef who then gives Paro advice on what to do about the dream. And it's Yosef who now does this administration policy. As far as the Psukim see fit to tell us, this is not Yosef being given Ruach HaKodesh. This is Yosef being sharp. That's really the way the Psukim presented. You could, though, read this in a negative, meaning we've built up the positive side of what he's doing for them. But number one, did he really need to acquire everything for Paro in order to save Mitzrayim? Couldn't he just have said, look, here's seed, go use it?
No one did that then.
But that's not my question. My question is not would he have been doing something unusual. My question is, did he need to do this? The answer is no. Right? Not only that, you can make the argument, and I've seen the argument made, that Yosef creates resentment here. And that resentment comes out against his descendants. Because people don't forget, Lasher lo yadas Yosef. Paro may act as though he doesn't know who Yosef was, but the people have not forgotten. And keep in mind, it's not just Paro who's bad to the Jews. It's the rank and file who beat up on the Jews, right? B'chor hashivcha, Rashi says that even the slaves in Egypt were beating up on the Jews. Rabbi Shai Held has an essay on this in source number 3. Take a look at this. I was looking for something else and found this. He says, but faithful service to Pharaoh does not necessarily righteousness make. The fact that he's doing really well for Pharaoh doesn't mean that he's righteous. What of Joseph's treatment of the Egyptian people? Joseph does indeed save lives, no small feat in the midst of a widespread famine. And yet the reader is left to wonder just how many of the steps Joseph takes are really necessary. Feeding the Egyptians is one thing, but progressively stripping them of everything they have is seemingly another. In what is perhaps another irony, the Israelites themselves will soon find out that being fed by one's owner creates an unhealthy and undignified sense of dependence, keeping one bound to one's oppressor, right? When they're already out of Mitzrayim, they can remember, B'shivteinu al sivhar basar, we got everything from our enslavers. Assume for a moment that Joseph's actions at the moment of crisis itself are defensible. It is nevertheless difficult to understand why he makes the serfdom of the Egyptians permanent, quote, to this very day. Right? Did you notice that? They're avadim ya'ara yom hazeh. Whatever that means when you read that in Chumash.
What's the percentage of that?
So, no, he's reading it as let's go back to the pasuk. Yeah, no, you're right. You don't have to read it that way. It depends on what is the chok that he creates in Chav Vav. Does it include Chav Hey, or is it really just the 1/5? You can make the argument that he's not talking about the enslavement. I hear that. Just the 20%. When the Torah and he goes into this further, he's still building on that idea, which again we may not accept. But when he says when the Torah imagines when the Torah imagines Israel's life in the land, it prohibits the permanent selling of the selling of land. More generally, biblical texts insist that land is a heritage rather than a commodity to be bought and sold, let alone for all time. Deuteronomy is especially emphatic that when the people arrive in the land, debt must be robbed of its tyrannical power in order to, quote, limit human misery. In particular, slavery must have a built-in limit of 6 years. Permanent enslavement is unthinkable. So granted, he's building on an assumption that the slavery is permanent, and maybe it's not. But certainly the sale of the land and the claim to 20% is permanent. In other words, the Torah passionately prohibits the Israelites from doing to one another what Joseph does to the Egyptian people as a whole. Interesting note also, this also from this Rabbi Held. If you take a look at source number 4, he caught this. When the pasuk says that Yosef moves the people into cities or moves them by cities, depending on how you read that pasuk, so Rashbam clearly reads it as moving either way, he reads it as population transfer, and he writes, Kemosha asa Sancherev. Like Sancherev did. Sancherev, of course, the Assyrian king who exiles the Aseret Hashvatim, the 10 lost tribes. That's what Yosef was doing. That they couldn't claim a historical hold on the land after the sale. Of the people in Tanakh you don't want to be compared to, Sancherev is fairly high up on the list. Right? I mean, Nebuchadnezzar is worse, fine. Haman may be worse. But you don't want Nebuchadnezzar to be your model. And one wonders as you read this, whether Rashbam is just saying, look, here's somebody who transfers the population, here's somebody who transfers the population.
Like an army tactical, not really.
It may, though, entail a little bit of moral judgment.
Because in the end of the day, all they just give them seeds. Why couldn't they just stay put and help give them seeds?
Yeah.
It is a little funny that you do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, what Yosef is doing with the land is controversial. I think that you could read it as positive. And I think you could also read it as nonetheless having a negative component. But the part that I wanted to really focus on is this business with the priests and not buying their land. I had a tangential note that I just put here, number 5. I didn't take the time to translate it because it's really just it's an out there note from Rabbi Bachaye that I came across and couldn't leave it. he says that's why Moshe goes for Yisro's daughter. Because Yisro is Kohen Midian, and originally from Egypt, and therefore Paro has no options on the land of Yisro. Moshe is worried that Paro is going to make life miserable for him. So he specifically wants to marry the daughter of Kohen Midian, not because Yisro is wonderful, not because Tzipora is wonderful, but because of the tax break. That's what Rabbeinu Bachai says. And but apparently under Paro's control. And not only that, it gets worse. He says, and he wants specifically this Kohen, not any other, because he has a lot of daughters, and therefore he's not going to give Moshe a hard time about marrying his daughter. He'll just be happy that he found somebody to marry his daughter. I didn't make it up. It's Rabbeinu Bachai. I hadn't noticed that before. Okay.
It's not far.
Well, Moshe is able to run away and end up there. And it's a 3-day trip when he comes back, right? The whole business with the Milah for
Can I just ask Yosef's status? And after he was taken out of jail, was he free? Like, could he have gone back to his family in Eretz Canaan? Was he...
Right, so that's a classic question of why is it that Yosef did not write home? Benel discusses it, and others discuss what was up that Yosef just kept on going in Mitzrayim, and what his ability to leave was, or to identify was. Some suggest it was self-preservation, that if he was known as an Ivri, even though he identifies as an Ivri, but somehow if he has made that connection too close, he would have made his position more precarious. Others suggest that he's doing this because he wants to play out the tshuva of his brothers / fulfillment of the dreams. There are different explanations for it, but everybody wonders, to the point where you have the classic medrash that says this is actually Yaakov's punishment for staying in the house of Lavan as long as he did, without visiting home. So you left Yitzchak and Rivka, and now Yosef is going to be gone from you, and the periods of time line up in terms of that. He's 20 years in the house of Lavan. Yosef he goes down at 17, and then he stands in front of Paro at 30, and he's 39 when Yaakov finally comes down. So they discuss how that works, what the extra 2 years are about, and the extension of his time in jail for an extra 2 years.
Could you not say that was a waste of time, even starting with the dream, that Yosef sort of knew he had some sort of important parts to play in getting, just the whole story of Mitzrayim to happen?
He believes that. He says it.
Right, that even from the get-go, so everything that happens to him, including all of this, he knows that there's an end game here.
So this fellow, Rabbi Held, actually makes that argument, that when Yosef says to his brothers, Ki lemechya shlachani Elokim lifnechem, Hashem sent me for mechya, that doesn't just mean to feed our family, but it's to feed everybody. Paralleling with what the Egyptians said, because the Egyptians said, Heche Yisanu. Right? You gave us michya.
Right.
So there is a possibility.
Yeah. I have a question. See, Rabbi Held holds it as a criticism towards, in a way, to Yosef that he did this to the mystery, because...
Well, he's cagey in his article, but I quoted the criticism part.
Oh, okay. But the truth is we have different halachas for going with Jews in a way. Like we can't find that a Jewish person can't charge interest in another Jew, but to a goy they could, right? There's different halachas.
Right, but generally...
Also with slavery, right? I don't think the same halachas apply to a Jewish slave in it.
That is certainly true, right?
So then why would this be considered criticism?
Right. So the general trend in halacha on these matters is that the baseline that you treat everybody with is supposed to be moral and ethical, and then for Jews you are required to go above and beyond. Right. The interest case is a perfect example we've discussed before. Interest-free loans are economic suicide. Right? An interest-free loan is a good way to burn your money. You might as well just create a bonfire and throw it all in. Because in your best case scenario, you get paid back on time in full without having to go after them, without any litigation, getting a based in or anything. And all you've lost is opportunity cost and inflation. That's your best case scenario. It gets a lot worse from there. It's simply stuck. That's where the Torah presents interest-free loans. If you did that to the world, you'd have nothing. So it's something that you're only supposed to extend to people who keep to this bris, to this covenant, and are members of your family. It's true that when you deal with the laws of Avadim also, the laws give special privileges to Jewish slaves that you don't find with a non-Jew. So for example, there's a rule of not being a slave permanently, right? That's specifically Eved Ivri. That's not true Ebed Kanani. And I think that's a strike against his argument in that regard. But what he's saying about the land, I think, still holds water. What he's saying about the sale of the land permanently, I think, is still of substance. But I really want to get to the Kohen. But yes, they do offer it first, and that's one of the arguments that what he's doing is legitimate. And
you know what that is, Rabbi?
the question is this: the special treatment they get, we will see from various Mefarshim, is actually not Paro's decision; it's Yosef's decision. And what we're going to have to do is ask why he's treating them in a special way, and why it is that if you look back at the Psukim, the Torah actually tells us about it twice. Right? In Pasuk Chav Beis, it says he didn't buy the land of the Kohanim. They have their portion from Paro. And then again in Pasuk Chav Vav, he made this the rule until this very day. Only he didn't take the land of the Kohanim. So why is Yosef doing this, and why is the Torah telling us about it twice? So first of all, the general assumption in almost every commentator that I read, and I think the simple read of the Psukim, is that the priests are doing well. Meaning they get a portion of food, therefore they don't need to sell their land, therefore Yosef doesn't buy it, right? That's what it sounds like. I did see one parish called the Panim Yachos, who says that actually when the Pasuk says, Achlu es chukam, it means they finished their allotment, and Yosef refused to buy their land. In other words, they wanted to sell their land in order to be able to get more food, because what Paro was giving them as their portion was not enough, and Yosef said, I'm not doing that. I'm not interested in helping you. But that's not the trend. That's not the standard view among the commentators on this. Also, as I said, the commentators assume that it's Yosef's decision. Even though at first read it sounds like this is what Paro did, nonetheless, that's not the way that the commentators in the Midrashim read it. We'll see more about this, but the way that they read the Pasuk, I think, is in one of three ways.
Is there a Nida Keneged Nida when it comes to the Shivas?
What do you mean?
Where they were excluded from, they didn't have to do any backbreaking labor, so because Yosef was...
No, as our Kohanim.
Yeah.
It's because of this rule.
Because of this rule. So,
it's not Nida Keneged Nida, it's just because of the law.
hang in there, we'll come to that. We'll come to that. But just trying to show first how to read the Pasuk, if this is really Yosef. So one way to read it is what the Medrash does in number 6, which asks the question, we're going to come back to this Medrash later, but it asks the question, Lama hiskim Yosef im Paro laseis bar lekomrim chinam. Why did Yosef agree with Paro to give the priests food for nothing? In this read, Paro is the one who said there's a certain portion that goes to the priests, but Yosef has the ability to disagree and potentially change it, because Yosef's been handed administration of the land. So Paro says to him, I want the priests to receive X, and Yosef says, well, economically that's a bad idea. He's going to win, and therefore Yosef is seen as complicit. That's one level to this. The Rosh, as well as the collection of commentaries called Panei Raza, go further with it and read it as no, Yosef actually was the one who pushed this forward. Panei Raza was written in the 14th century. It's a collection of comments by the authors of the Tosfos on Chumash, sort of like Da'at Zekanim, which you may be familiar with. So take a look at source number 7, where I brought you the Panei Raza version of it, which I thought was even more strong than the way the Rosh presented it. The Hiksha Hari Orleans, Rabbeinu Yaakov of Orleans, asked the following question. Sherei Ksiv ki chok la'kohanim. If Pasuk says it's a portion of the Kohanim from Paro, Demash mikodem v'lo sheftaran Yosef. It sounds like it was an existing law, not that Yosef exempted. However, his problem is that Midrashim that we're going to quote are going to say it's Yosef's decision. And the Pasuk doesn't sound like it. V'yesh lomar. So he answers, Dali Perusho. This is what it means. Admas HaKohanim lo kana, he did not acquire the land of the Kohanim, ki chok tikein v'asahu l'Kohanim, because he enacted and created a law for the Kohanim, shishtadel adavar eitzel Paro. He promoted this idea to Paro. It was Yosef's idea that the Kohanim should have special treatment, And he sold the idea to Paro.
How do you get that from the pasuk?
He's not. The Rimei Leon is looking at this and saying, I have Midrashim, which we haven't seen yet, but we're going to. Number 6 will be an example of it, which are going to present Yosef as the creator of this policy for particular reasons. And he is bothered. He says, well, what do you do with the pasuk? The pasuk doesn't sound like that. And his answer is, when the pasuk says it was Paro's decision, it doesn't tell us what made Paro do it. And the answer is, Yosef was the one who promoted this to Paro. It's his way to reconcile the Midrashim with the pasuk. However, I don't think he needs to do that, because I would offer a third way to read the pasuk, which I think is the simplest. Go back to...
two conflicting approaches in this source?
Yes. It's two conflicting approaches on the pasuk. But I think there's a simpler way to do it. Go back to the first slide, and to the pasuk. That's a phase. Yosef in pasuk Chavei, right? Ragad Masa Kohanim lo kada. He didn't acquire the land of the Kohanim. Ki chok la Kohanim me'es Paro. There was a portion. Chok we've rendered, and the Gemara renders as a portion of food for the Kohanim from Paro, meaning from Paro's stores. Not that Paro ordered it. The Kohanim had an allotment from Paro's grain. They ate the portion that Paro gave them, in the sense that Paro is giving everybody everything. But it's Yosef's decision all along that they receive it. And it makes sense, because Yosef is in charge of the food. So, however you do this, there are ways to reconcile the psukim with the idea that it's Yosef who's doing it, but the question is still why. So I would like to outline 3 approaches. I don't know what time we got started, so I'm not sure how much time we have. But
3 approaches just for the priests.
3 approaches to explain just the priests, correct. The first approach is that it's self-serving. He's doing this for himself. First of all, you could suggest just political gain, especially if you take the view that Kohanim is actually, the nobility and not idolatrous priests. But take a look at source number 8, Rav Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, who suggests Yosef is planning ahead. And this is not what Nehemiah was saying, but it ends up leading you there. Venerally, Shiskaven Bezet To'elas Gedola Beis Aviv. I'm just going to read my translation, but you have the Hebrew there. It appears to me that Yosef is actually doing this in order to help his father's house. What do you mean? First of all, he moves the nation into cities, meaning he's transferring everybody. No one has their own land. And that means Yosef also moves the residents of Goshen into another land, and he moves his family there. Did you ever wonder how it is that we got Goshen? The answer is because Yosef cleared everybody else out. That's not Haksava Kabbalah's invention. That other Mefarshim say as well. And
he moved everyone, he just shuffled them around and gave the Jews a spot and no one noticed?
Yes.
I always thought it was uninhabited land.
No, it was not uninhabited at all. It was very good land.
40 years ago. Yeah, it was actually given to Sarah a long time ago, right? That's why you're not accused of playing with prison, because Paro gave it to Sarah a long time ago.
Well, there is that idea in the Medrash, but this is building on a simpler thing. And look at the psukim again. Look at the end of what I brought you. Look at the end of what I brought you in source number 1. This explains why it is that we repeated about the transfer and the land. Pasuk Chavav said, Yosef made this a rule, right, that the land of the Egyptians would go to Paro. Therefore, the land of Israel was in the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen. We got a portion because Yosef had moved all the populations around.
So is this talking in the future? Because at that point, the brothers had not yet arrived.
No, we're now at the end of the 2 years. This is now the end of the 2 years. It gave you the chronology. It said this happened in year 1, this happened in year 2. The brothers show up, and now they moved to land.
So the brothers showing up, though, is not written in the middle of this.
Correct. This is presented in the same way. Sefer Bereshis does this all the time.
Recap.
Yeah. When Yishmael disappears from the picture, we get the whole lineage of his family going back to when he was first out of the house and getting married, and then leading into the future. Esav also, when he disappears from the picture, we get all the way forward. These are the 8 kings that Edom, that Esav is going to have. It's it's not happening then. We're not given parallel, events.
It does help you understand this whole this whole psukim of the Chumash sort of
leading up to Pesach Chazayin as the most important Pesach. Like, this whole story happened because of Pesach Chazayin.
Yes, correct. So that's number one, but he's not done. Go back to number 8 and the Ksava Kabbalah. He says, still, even after they get Goshen, his father's house resembled the other residents of the land. You have to give 1/5 the power also. So he developed a strategy such that the priests would eat their portion as given to them. Their land would not be sold to Paro. They wouldn't have the burden of giving 1/5. And through this, his brothers would also be free of the 1/5 tax as shepherds of the sheep, which were so important to the Egyptians. Raising the animals that the Egyptians worshipped, right? When Yosef says, tell Paro your shepherds, ki to'avat Mitzrayim kol ro'ei tzon, he takes to'eva, meaning that which they worship. So, as has been explained previously, thereby resembling their priests, servants of their God, and just as these were exempt from paying the 1/5, so too these who sustain them. It's self-serving. Well, therefore it said, and they settled in it, for Goshen was a portion for them without any tax on it. The opposite of the other residents who owned no portion and therefore obligated in the 1/5 tax.
Yeah, and now with parsonage and things like that, there's certain tax breaks for religious.
Yes, there absolutely are. It's not something new, that this society invented.
But it'd be interesting that they would be giving a tax break to the priests of another religion.
Yes.
Like
the Egyptians don't think they are. The Egyptians think we're giving it to the people who raise sheep, which are our God.
Or our...
This is our...
The Egyptians say, I want to be the one to raise the sheep, so that,
You had to have special status in order to be able to do it. You had to be cool. You had to be a priest, basically. And
no, to be a shepherd.
No, but I'm saying the priests were the shepherds, is what he's theorizing. And because we were shepherds, that made us like their priests.
Oh.
Yeah.
It was already a whole community of shepherds.
No. It all depends on how you read the words Ki to'avat Mitzrayim kol ro'ei tzon.
David was like the one who had to take care of the sheep, right?
You're moving into a different society. These are people who worship sheep.
Okay.
Yeah. Different story. When you use them for war, it's not the same thing as when you bow to them. So, that's one take. Second take, which is very popular in the Mefarshim, is that actually Yosef orchestrates this, and this is what the Medrash Seichel Tov was talking about, as Hakaras HaTov, as a matter of gratitude to the priests, because they helped him. You learned this, Rashi, probably at some point, about how when Potiphar's wife makes the allegation about Yosef, he ends up in jail instead of dead, right? Why does he end up in jail instead of dead?
To help the... Never heard this.
No.
They skipped that part.
No, you heard this story for sure. That because they know that Yosef didn't really do it. The story about the shirt?
Yeah, they found.
Because she says, look, he left this here, the clothing. In the event that Yosef had been attacking her and she fought him off and he fled, the clothing would be intact. However, that's not the way it worked. He was running away, she grabbed it and it tore. Says the Medrash, the priests, who are, I guess, the detectives, the intellectuals, whatever they are, look at it and say, this isn't the clothing of a man who was attacking you. This is the clothing of a man who was fleeing from you. And therefore they spare his life. Take a look at Yonasan ben Uziel in number 9. This is not really Yonasan ben Uziel. You know, Targum Yonasan on Chumash is not written by Yonasan ben Uziel. The Gemara says that he never wrote on Chumash. Nonetheless, it's somebody else who put the name Yonasan on it. There is some discussion about who it was. If you go to the scholars, they'll call it pseudo Jonathan, which is a fancy way of saying this isn't Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. It's just something that was called Yonatan. In any case, the only reason it's a big deal is because the Gemara talks about specifically how his Perush on Nach was Kodesh Kodashim, very mystical, holy of holies, and how he wasn't allowed to write something on Chumash. So to have something on Chumash that says Targum Yonasan, like the Gemara says, didn't exist.
There is a Targum Yonasan on Nach.
Yeah.
That is Yonasan ben Uziel.
That's what we understand.
It's not really him.
Yeah. So look at what it says. L'chod arad chumranaya lo zaban. Only the land of the priests he didn't purchase. Min biglal dechamun lezechusa bisman deba ribonei lemiktale. They saw merit for him when his master wanted to kill him. V'sheitzvui min din ketol. They saved him from execution. But because he said to give them a portion from Paro, right, the way that I wanted to read that pasuk, he said, give them a portion from Paro. They ate their portion, which Paro gave them. Therefore, they didn't sell their land. So it's hakaras hatov. That's the dominant explanation that you find in the commentators. And then you have a third possibility. One possibility is he's doing this to serve himself and his family. Second possibility is that he's doing it as an expression of gratitude. And third possibility is that he's doing it out of commitment to the good of the local government, which the priests are a part of. I base this on source number 10. This is another one of those midrashim from my shir about Yosef, Daniel, and Esther. The Medrash was talking about Mordechai's decision to save Ahasuerus' life. Right? When he finds out about the plot of Bigtan and Teresh, he could have just let it go forward. Doesn't. Why? Omar, Mordechai said, Yaakov bireches Paro. Yaakov gave Paro a bracha. Right? By bracha Yaakov is Paro. Right? After Paro meets him and says, wow, you're old. His response is to give him a bracha. Yosef gilalo. Yosef revealed to him the dreams and advised him and so on. Daniel gilalo Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel advised Nebuchadnezzar as well. He explained his dreams to him, and he also gave him advice. So Mordechai says, I'm going to do the same. But he gave Esther Amaka, and he told Esther. So what you get here is a pattern of trying to help the local authority. Now, this is consistent with Yosef's experience and his general approach to authority, right? Always, from the beginning. Yosef brings to Yaakov word about the errors of his siblings, the other children. Yosef earns favor from Potiphar and is in charge of the house. Yosef earns favor by helping out in the jail. He offered Paro advice about how to avoid the problem of the famine. Wherever Yosef is in, whatever situation he's in, he's always trying to help out those who are in charge. And you could read it as self-serving if you want, or you could read it as a philosophy. If it's self-serving, it doesn't really work well. Right? Because in each situation, he gains enemies.
It backfires on him.
Right. And Chazal see it each time. Sometimes it's obvious in the Psukim, right? With Yosef, obviously, it gains him the enmity with Yaakov, it's obvious it gains the enmity of his brothers. Right? With Potiphar, so Potiphar's wife ends up attacking him. That's not necessarily about resentment because of his role in the household, but each time he's undermined by others within the situation. Rashi says, did I bring it? No, I didn't bring it on here. But Rashi says the butler resents Yosef. When the butler tells Paro, when I was in jail, there was this kid, right? And he explained the dream. He says, B'shami tanu na'ar ivri. So Rashi says he's trying to downplay the significance of Yosef. He's only a na'ar, and he's an ivri. So, think twice about putting any weight on his word. And then, of course, with Paro, what Yosef does at the end of the parsha, you can read their comments of gratitude on the one hand, you could also read their comments as complaints. Right? As in, look, we have no money left. Look, now we have no cattle left. Right? You have both sides to it. But okay. What we now have is Yosef pursuing a policy which benefits Egypt, although it comes at a very high cost. We have Yosef being involved in and possibly initiating a policy of helping the priests, possibly to serve himself, more commonly taken as hakaras hatov, gratitude to the priests, but also can be read as supporting the local government. And so the question I come to is, why does the Torah tell us about this? Do you really need to know all about how Yosef administered the land? Meaning you could have stopped before this whole passage, right? At this stage in the story, we know that Yosef did something to get himself to a position of being viceroy. We know that the brothers are down there. We know the family has come down there. So say, now they're living in Goshen. Why did you give me this whole story about what Yosef is doing for the land and what Yosef is doing for the priests? So I think you learn two lessons, right? You learn a hakaras hatov lesson. The Chashuk Yechemed, Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein makes this point, that you learn here hakaras hatov, including for the priests of Avodah Zarah. But he's not one to say it first. The Shalah, in source number 11, says it. He says, Tzarech adam shelo lihiyos kafui tova. He says, you must not deny the good someone does for you. V'yishalem tova tachas tova. Always repay good for good, afilu l'goy, including to a non-Jew. Hakorim shel Mitzrayim masu tova Yosef. The Egyptian priests helped out Yosef, and so on. So you learn from here hakaras hatov, and you also learn from here, I think, the support for the local government, for the local authorities. You think about Yirmiyahu Parachav Tes when he says to the Jews, you're going to be exiled to Babel, and I want you to daven on behalf of the local government, which Jews have done down through the ages. You look at that medrash about Esther and Mordechai saving Achashverosh, about Daniel helping Nebuchadnezzar. It's interesting because in the Gemara of Bava Basra, Daniel is criticized for the aid that he gives Nebuchadnezzar. When he tells Nebuchadnezzar, give tzedakah and then this decree won't happen to you, the Gemara asks, why in the world did he do that? And tries to offer different explanations for it. But I think...
In that case also, Nebuchadnezzar was evil, it was to the detriment of the Jews. Maybe we're supposed to be nice to them and have a conversation, but not to make it worse for us.
Right.
In Daniel's case, that may have been...
In Daniel's case, right. I mean, that's part of the question there is you're forestalling the punishment of a very, very bad man.
Right.
But it is extrapolated. People learn from that for other cases as well. What about this business of supporting the priests? So here you end up with a very fascinating, at least to me anyway, split of views. One view says this is a good model to emulate. What Yosef did, giving the priests special stuff, is a good model and we should emulate it. And then you have those who say, no, it's a bad model and we should be different. Brilliant. Take a look at source number 12, Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. He says, the land of the Kohanim didn't go to Paro. Who needed this in the Torah? To teach you, if the king taxes the city, so the people should pay. The Talmidei Chachamim should be exempt. If they're learning Torah day and night, they shouldn't pay in. Why? Because the tax isn't really about them. It's Vavon Amei Haaretz. It's because of the sins of the general population. But they are being protected by the Torah of Hashem. So Paro helped the priests of Avodah Zarah. How much more so should we give tax breaks to our Kohanim?
Israel won't go over.
Well, they already have army.
But that's the.
But I was just saying that Paro was the one who set it up, not Yosef. Like Paro model.
This is taking, but he's right. So he's wording it as though it's Paro. You're right.
And since when are taxes because of the aronim of the people?
So that's a good question, but it's not surprising within the philosophy of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. That's very Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. That the government taxation is not just like this is the norm for living in the land, but this is actually we must have done something wrong, and that's why the government is doing this to us. In the philosophy of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid and his school, anything that's happening to you from the government, and remember, he's like the era of martyrdom in Germany in the 13th century, 12th century. Everything that happens to you is ultimately reward and punishment for actions that you've done. His school is the school that says to die al Kiddush Hashem willingly, even to daven to be able to do that. Like that's where he comes from. But that statement. He also, I like that last line. He says if Paro can do it, certainly we could. And the Panach Raza, following along these lines from the Balei HaTosfos, says that this is written so that we'll learn that Israel should not be stingy, avoiding giving trumos and maestros and all of the different gifts that you're supposed to give. They gave, so we should learn to give as well. So this is the view that it's a good model, right? Then on the other end you have Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, and he has number 14. He says there's some kind of philosophy out there that suggested that Moshe got all of his wisdom from the Egyptian priests. That they trained him and they taught him and so on. And so he says, Rosh Raphael Hirsch says, that this shows it's not true. Because their priests own land. Our Kohanim don't have land. is just the opposite. He says our Kohanim did not have a guaranteed income. Our Kohanim did not own land. Dafka, we don't emulate what happened there. It's an entirely opposite view of it. I also saw quoted from Nechama Leibowitz that she writes on this that it's actually a statement that system is unjust. It's not fair that they receive food and they get the land. We give them Truma and Maaser, but they don't own land. So that's another anti-take. So you have two different views about this model. One other note that I want to make sure to include is in number 15. Rabbi Shalom Karmi is a professor at YU, brilliant and a fantastic writer, wrote an essay, UC 2018, about racism in Judaism and specifically by observant Jews. And he talks about different factors that are involved. And one factor, he says, is potentially the anti-Semitism that generations of Jews experienced. And he's talking about growing up in Brooklyn, as you can see here. He says, I've written in these pages of my childhood at 715 St. Mark's Avenue in Brooklyn. Only a few years later, by the 60s and early 70s, one visited the family still there with trepidation. More than once, a bottle whizzed past the visitor's ear and shattered on the pavement, accompanied by the hurler's hearty advice that Jews get off his turf. One of my aunts was forced to flee 3 times in 20 years. And my mother bore the marks of several beatings. Can you imagine such experiences not engendering resentment and bitterness among the victims and those who absorbed indirectly what they suffered? The old abandoned Jews of whom I speak, quite a few of them refugees of European persecution, felt their oppression in its most proximate and visible form. The American scene was rife with prejudice which, once confirmed by experience, was not easily set aside. They did not have the knack of protesting attractively by chanting and shimmying in the approved manner, but in their helplessness under their breath, they knew how to curse. It's a good essay. It's worth finding it online and reading it in general. But he points out that when we face hatred from others and from society, so that breeds distrust. It breeds a sense of we're not co-citizens with them. It breeds a feeling of hostility towards government. And so what you end up with are people whose language, and I can't blame people who experience this. By the time I was growing up in New York, not that long after this, I certainly had a much milder experience than he describes here. People like that develop a certain language, right? A language which is very derogatory towards other groups within society and towards government. You end up with justification for tax evasion of various kinds, cash-only businesses and things like that. Because after all, they mistreat us, they're terrible to us, what do I owe to them? And it's very easy to justify, and we're not the only ones. I think other ethnic groups that feel like they've suffered do the same thing. It's a natural human response. But I think what Yosef does here shows a different route. Right? Yosef has suffered. Granted, his first suffering doesn't come from Egypt. His first suffering comes from his brothers. But he's sold as a slave as he protests, I'm not a slave, I was kidnapped. Right? He's thrown into jail for something he knows he didn't do because he gets accused. Right? Each time along the way, he is being abused and he's suffering, and yet it's hakaras hatov. It's contributing to the good of the system. I think he's giving us a different way to act when facing. I don't like the term anti-Semitism because it's a mistake. Meaning Semites includes a whole lot of people who aren't Jews, but you know what I'm talking about. When you're facing stuff like that, it becomes very easy for us and for our children to absorb a policy of let's hate and not trust everybody else. And I think Yosef gives a very different response that's probably important.
Assuming it's
Positive,
right?
Right. Unless you read it as, let's get everything we can out of this country and make them all miserable. Right. I am reading what he does for them as positive, especially because he's not taking any of it for himself. He's giving it all to Paro. It's not like he's enriching himself.
But it does sort of fit nicely the part of it that it just seems like he's trying to make it best for the Jews, for his brothers.
Well, the truth is, while I find the Ksav HaKabbalah in general a lot of fun, the idea that we were going to gain the 1/5 because we were raising sheep also, I think is a little of a stretch. I I read it more closely the way Nehama wanted to read it, which is that our Kohanim get exempted from work, as the Medrash says, because, and not just as the Medrash says, as the Sukkim indicate, because Aaron gets to just go back and forth without anybody bothering him. So Sheva Levi clearly has some kind of special status. But in terms of how we benefited, I find Aksava Kabbalah's approach a little bit.
Even finding us a place to live, like giving us a city, right? Like that part of it, maybe not.
Yes, no, right, no, that part that they're moved out and therefore we get Goshen, that I can see. Right, that's where you want to be. And it can be. I think it can be. So
it sounds like they're offering it. We're starving.
Yeah.
We are starving.
That supports the 80, for sure. Yes. Although he institutes the 20% tax. They didn't offer that.
Yeah, but they have to pay back the grain.
Yes. So I just wanted to make sure you note on the back the review questions, because I've started doing that and I find them helpful for me and hopefully for others. 3 arguments to show that his policies are good for Mitzrayim, right? And 3 that show that they were bad for Mitzrayim. The people are grateful. They're keeping 80%, and he's giving it all to Paro, right? That shows that it's not selfish and that it is in fact good. Not to mention, hey, they survived. Don't knock it. On the other hand, was it really necessary to do it? The permanent sale of the land.
I don't think you can have those questions in that era. I don't see anything bad in that.
Okay. I don't mind that.
That's how all governments work, and that is what, and they wanted to live, that's what you gotta do.
Right.
I still think that giving it all to Paro doesn't mean that it wasn't self-serving, because if Paro gets all this money, he's going to love Yosef.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it's bribery, like your family's coming, bribe the authorities. So it's nice to them. That makes sense.
Well, except that when he starts this, he doesn't know his family's coming at this stage.
And by the way, with the moving of the
starts
city,
before that.
he doesn't know his family's going to come and he wants to give them a check.
No, that's actually when they come down. That
He
needs to be
moves
when.
them after
Yeah, it's
they
year
come?
2. It's year 2.
Is he like a proto sort of socialist or like?
Well, you could read him as a proto-capitalist.
No, like no pride and everything is like.
Oh, communist.
Yeah, like exactly, like not. Yeah.
Well, it's not, because if we're communist, then everything would be this. Nationalization of institutions is there. Yes.
Why didn't they eat their cattle if they
I
offered?
was thinking the same thing. They worship.
Well, they worship their sheep, but why didn't they eat their cows or horses even are?
Yeah.
If they had so much cattle to give him, then eat it.
I don't know.
Are they all vegetarian?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I've not read about vegetarianism as a dominant thing in Egyptian society.
I mean, they seem to have tons of cattle. They're all praising him, and they're starving.
I don't know. Maybe because they realize that that's not sustainable.
Seeds could grow your whole farm.
Yeah. Like you eat the meat and then what? Now you're done. You enjoyed the steak while you had it. But that's it. I don't know. There's more here in the review questions. I think they're helpful. All right. Thank you.